Good evening. I'm Mark Dambley, Chair of the Board of Trustees. Before we begin tonight's meeting, I want to thank our trustees. Over the past few months, we've seen a lot of each other via our computer screens. Matt and I appreciate your dedication to as a university trustee and all the time each of you have dedicated to guide Penn State through the many complex decisions related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I wanted to thank all of you for that. Public who are viewing today's meeting via WPSU, the agenda is available at www.trustees.psu.edu. For the sake of audio clarity, all those who are connected to today's meeting via audio or video should mute their connection when they're not speaking. We will now proceed with tonight's business. Shannon, please call the roll. When your name is called, please be sure to unmute your connection. Shannon?
Amoros.
Here.
Barron.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Casey.
Here.
Cotner.
Here.
Color.
Here.
Dambley.
Here.
Dandria.
Here.
Delegati. Detweiler. Dietrich. Duran.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Fenza.
Here.
Hahn.
Here.
Harpster.
Here.
Hartzler.
Here.
Hoffman. Jubileer.
I saw.
Here.
Sorry.
Thank you. Kleppinger.
Here.
Lubert.
Here.
Masser.
Here.
Oldsey.
Here.
Paterno.
Here.
Pagula. Pope.
Here.
Potts.
Here.
Rakowicz.
Here.
Rapp.
Here.
Redding. Rivera. Schuyler.
Here.
Short.
Here.
Stenell.
Here.
Tribeck. Wogman.
Here.
Wolf. And Shipley.
Here.
Hey, Shannon, it's Mary Lee. I think you missed me.
Oh, Schneider, thank you. That concludes the roll, and we do have a quorum.
Great. And Shannon, I did see Chris Hoffman here. I don't know if you got his name.
I did, thank you.
Lovely. Great. Thank you. The purpose of tonight's meeting is for the board to consider and act on two resolutions. The first resolution would expand the university's borrowing authority to provide greater flexibility to meet financial needs by expanding the use of borrowed funds to include working capital needs. This resolution will first be considered by the Committee on Finance, Business, and Capital Planning, and then the full board. The second resolution to be considered and acted upon by the full board is a resolution to approve the acquisition by Penn State Health of the Holy Spirit Health System. Copies of both resolutions have been provided to trustees in advance. We will now adjourn the meeting of the full board and call the meeting of the Committee on Finance, Business, and Capital Planning into session. Chair Schneider will preside. Mary Lee?
All right, thank you, Mark. I note that a quorum of the FBCP committee is present on the call. The only agenda item for consideration, as Mark said, by this committee is the resolution recommending that the board authorize the university to expand the use of borrowed funds to include working capital needs through the establishment of a $250 million line of credit. I would like to remind everyone of the difficult but necessary actions that the university has taken in these uncertain and unprecedented times. These include implementing a 3% across the board reduction to unit budgets for 2021, implementing a freeze in general salary increases for all faculty and staff for FY 2021, implementing a 50% pay reduction for certain employees effective May 4th through June 30th, 2020 due to lack of work, delaying or deferring several projects in the current 5-year capital plan in order to save $60 million in previously planned spending, applying for and receiving $55 million through the recently enacted Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, of which 50% will be applied to emergency student aid, executing a pre-funding agreement with a state employees retirement system that will provide $57.3 million worth of annual savings to the university, $40 million of which will relieve pressure on the education and general budget. We reduced 2020 summer tuition, and we're recommending a freeze in tuition rates for FY 2021, along with a reduction in room and board rates to the fall. And last but not least, the university is aggressively implementing measures to reduce spending and accelerate the implementation of best practices in the procurement of goods, services, and university travel. In the midst of this crisis, we have maintained borrowing capacity and a strong credit rating, as recently reaffirmed by both Moody's and Standard & Poor's. This resolution seeks to provide the university with additional financial flexibility by providing access to a $250 million line of credit to further support working capital needs. With that, I'll call on David Gray for additional background and context. David?
Thank you, Mary Lee. If you give me just a second, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see it okay?
We can see it.
Okay, terrific. So we're going to quickly step you through the background of the short-term financing options that brings us to the recommendation for this resolution this evening. First, it's important to point out that the university does have some sources of cash, uncommitted cash flow, that's recently become available. The quasi-endowment that we have repurposed to help us with the SERS debt service will not be fully required in either FY20 or in FY21. So in FY20, we will have $34.6 million from that source, and in FY21, $30.6 million, or a total of $65.2 million in uncommitted cash flow that's available for operations. We have taken a close look at two short-term borrowing options. We've looked at both bank loans and a revolving line of credit, but principally because of the inherent flexibility that comes to us through the revolving line of credit, we find that to be substantially preferable and advantageous relative to a bank loan. So it is the revolving line of credit that we are recommending here this evening for your consideration. Typically, it carries a 1 to 3 year duration. We will do it through a private commercial bank, and we only use what we need to use. That's the most important contrast to a bank loan, where you're taking out a fixed amount, whereas with a line of credit, you only use what you need. So the recommendation before you, again, in consideration of the $65 million that we already will have in hand, is to seek your approval for a revolving line of credit of $250 million. It will be variable rate based on LIBOR plus 1 to 1.5%. In addition, there will be a commitment fee charge of somewhere between 0.3% and 0.4% on undrawn funds. And it assumes 50 million draws are taken out by the university on July 31st of this year, again at the end of October, and at the end of January of 2021. And principally, we're going to be using support for both E&G and for auxiliaries. And you can see in the table before you what the estimated financing costs will be. And again, this will yield cash flows as you see in the column, the new proposal, the $250 million line of credit, and what we will owe on that. Again, the utilization assumption, $150 million would be drawn down by E&G and approximately $100 million by auxiliaries. But again, this will be based upon need as it arises, and there's no requirement that we draw the full line of credit. So if the auxiliaries don't need $100 million, they can tap into only what they require for their operating purposes, and the same for the education and general budget. So the anticipated timeline is actually, it's already started. We've issued an RFP to identify a short list of banks to begin negotiating terms, assuming your approval here this evening. And then this week, we're seeking your resolution approval to authorize borrowing for operations. During July, we will negotiate all necessary legal documents with the chosen lender. And then by July 31st, we expect the finalization of all documents and closing on the line of credit. So simply put, in shorthand, the resolution that is before you is that a portion of the 2.012 billion total authorized obligations as defined in the 2017 resolution to support the current capital plan is hereby authorized to be used for working capital needs as determined by the officers of the university, and further resolved that except as amended by the 2019 resolution, the 2020 resolutions, and as amended hereby, the 2017 resolution remains in effect, and further resolved that the officers of the university are hereby authorized and directed to execute and deliver such other agreements and documents and to take such other action as may be necessary or appropriate in order to effectuate the foregoing resolutions. And Mary Lee, at this point, if there are any questions, I'd be pleased to address them.
Terrific. Thank you, David. And by the way, just given the format of the virtual meeting, I would like to ask that we limit questions to those from the members of the FBCP committee. So do the members of the committee have any questions for David? Any questions? Any discussion? All right. Well, I'll ask for a motion by a member of the committee to recommend the resolution to the full board for consideration and action. And please, before you either move or second, identify yourself so we can record that. So
This is
may I have a
Rob.
motion?
This is Rob, and I make a motion to move this resolution.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I second Alex Hartzler.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Rob. All right. Any further discussion? If none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all. The motion carries unanimously. There being no further business, the meeting of the Committee on Finance, Business, and Capital Planning is now adjourned. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mary Lee. The meeting of the full board is now back in session. Our first agenda item is the resolution recommending the board authorize the university to expand the use of borrowed funds to include working capital needs. Given no objection, I will ask for a motion to adopt the resolution. Please identify yourself when making the motion.
Mary Lee Schneider, so moved.
Bob Jubileer, second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. Next is a resolution approving the acquisition by Penn State Health of the Holy Spirit Health System. Given that this resolution has been provided to everyone in advance, I'll now call on Tom Stossel, Chief Network Development Officer for Penn State Health, to provide additional background and context. Tom?
Thank you, Mark. As a reminder for the trustees, in previous briefings, we've provided detail associated with the proposed transaction, which included an overview of the Holy Spirit Health System, its ongoing financial performance. We've reviewed the Penn State Health System strategic plan and have discussed how we believe this transaction has strategic fit with that overall direction. And we've also provided information around the deal structure and the terms associated with the proposed transaction. The good news is that we concluded successfully conversations with Geisinger leadership late last week, and now believe that we have finalized the remaining details in order to recommend the transaction and move forward with execution of the definitive agreement. So tonight, I'll provide a brief overview in review of just some of the highlights of information provided previously. Shannon, if you could advance to slide 2 for me, please, titled Holy Spirit Snapshot. This slide just gives you a reminder overview of the Holy Spirit organization. It is a 310 licensed bed inpatient facility. They staff about 200 beds regularly. The organization sees just more than 11,000 annual visits in terms of hospital admissions and around 44,000 emergency department visits. An important part of its infrastructure is its 14 modernized main operating rooms. It is a level 2 designated trauma center and employs approximately 100 physicians in its medical group. And the diagram on the right simply provides an overview of the corporations associated with the cluster of organizations called the health system. So the health system is the parent entity. That is the entity that Geisinger is the sole corporate member of. And then it has a hospital corporation. It has a sister corporation, which is its medical group. And then 2 other corporations, which are mostly oriented around real estate holdings and other real estate business activity. There is a proposal as part of this to create or to set up a new subsidiary. The West Shore Advanced Life Ambulance Company has been fully consolidated into Geisinger, and we would have to deconsolidate those assets and move it back into a new corporation that we would set up. And then in the restricted assets, there are just a handful of designated donations that were for the purposes locally at Holy Spirit, which would transition back to the health system as part of the overall transaction. On to slide 3. Again, as stated earlier, we believe this transaction really enables and expedites the execution of the Penn State Health strategy. We've talked about the relative importance of the local communities associated with Cumberland County and the broader greater Harrisburg region. Our focus as a health system is to provide a greater patient access in that marketplace and to provide a base of hospitals for independent practice providers to utilize. As you know, we're currently developing Hamden Medical Center, which is a 108-bed facility. Also in the relatively the same market, is about 5 miles away from Holy Spirit's location. And in general, we believe that this transaction greatly enables a transition strategy to stand up Hamden Medical Center more quickly, bolster the services at Holy Spirit, and have greater market presence and a viable option for healthcare competition in that marketplace. On to slide 4, please, Shannon. Thank you. This slide generally depicts the integration treatment of the various elements of the health system that we talked about in slide 2. We would have a new presence in the marketplace called Penn State Health Holy Spirit Medical Center. And essentially that management organization would preside over the main hospital and their real estate ventures. As a means of the transaction, we would actually be merging the Holy Spirit Health System Corporation into its hospital corporation and then moving it over into the Penn State family of organizations. And the Holy Spirit Physician Medical Group, called Spirit Physician Services, would essentially become integrated into the broader Penn State Health Medical Group. And then you can see the on the bottom diagram, the way that we would treat the pre-hospital services and the ambulance company. And on to slide 5. As we move forward, we do recognize risks associated with closing of the transaction. We are currently targeting the October of 2020 timeframe to complete the transaction. But to get to that point, we have to go through the regulatory approval process with both the Federal Trade Commission as well as the state's Attorney General. And in addition, we're in the process of finalizing transition services agreements with the Geisinger system. We would need to continue to, in effect, buy back certain central corporate services from Geisinger to make sure that these entities are functional on day 1 of the transaction, while then over a relatively short subsequent period of time, we would begin to one by one integrate those services into a central Penn State Health organization. And with that concludes our presentation for the evening, and I would hand the stage back over to trustee leadership.
Thank you, Tom. Any questions for Tom or others? Well, thank you very much, Tom, for your thoughtful presentation. And given no further questions, I'll ask for a motion to adopt the resolution. Please identify yourself when making the motion.
This is Steve, so moved.
Kathy Casey, second.
Excellent, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. The motion carries unanimously. That concludes our official business for tonight's meeting. In closing, I want to acknowledge our outgoing trustees, Bob Jubileer and Keith Mosser, whose last meeting is tonight. As I noted in May, it's been a pleasure serving with both of you. On behalf of the entire board, thank you for your dedication of time and service to this board and Penn State University. And I'm very, I'm upset that we can't see each other in person. And hopefully you'll accept an invitation by us at our next meeting in person to come and have a proper send-off. You two have been extraordinarily gracious with your time and your commitment to the university, and your wisdom has been wonderful. And we look forward to your continued involvement with the university at whatever level works for you both. So just thank you on behalf of all of us. And again, look forward to the time when we can see each other in person and celebrate appropriately. So thank you to both of you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. I certainly intend to keep involved.
Thanks, Mark. We'll look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. We can get together in person.
Yep. Thank you, Keith, very, very much. I appreciate it. With our agenda concluded, the meeting is adjourned. I want to thank you, and trustees, you can stay on the line and we'll convene our meeting after that. So thank you.